Hello, folks. Welcome to Holding On with Holder, where I talk to interesting people about interesting topics. My name is Steve Holder, and I am your host. My guest this evening is Scott Browne, UFO investigator, artist, and digital photographer. Hello, Scott. Thanks for being here.
How are you, Steve? Thanks for having me.
Well, I'm certainly glad to have you. So, for those that never heard of you, tell us a little bit about your background and who you are.
I got into this probably, right around 1987. I really didn't have an interest before that. I didn't really own any books on it. I never really looked into it. And there were some incidents that happened that I feel kind of that inspired me or pushed me in this direction. Uh, there's actually a documentary on YouTube that kind of goes into a lot of it about my early life and, things that happened that may be connected, maybe not. Um, so these two episodes were uh, two episodes of sleep paralysis, what they call sleep paralysis. Um, and it happened twice in a 2-week period. And when it was over with, it hasn't happened since, and it never happened before. It was just those two times in that 2-week period. So the second time it happened, I jumped up from it. I had this deep feeling of dread, fear, like something was there, was near me. It felt like there was something very close to me. So long story short, I snapped out of it, jumped up, turned on all the lights, looked around. There wasn't anything around. My wife was working at the time. She came home later on and I said, I think this place is haunted. And so I began to go into this story to tell her about what happened. So, I kind of let it go and forgot about it, and still occasionally kept coming back to the deep fear that I felt during it. It was like nothing that I had ever felt before. So some months went by, and at the time I had been reading a lot of biographies. So I walked into the bookstore. In the biography section, someone had accidentally shoved this book by Howard Blum called Out There into this section. Had nothing to do with biographies. I don't know why it was there, but I picked it up, and that set me on the road to where I am today. And I, became deeply interested in the subject, and just started doing my own research and then my own experiments with cameras and video cameras, and frames per second, and figuring out you know different things that were happening, like with the digital stuff and then computers. So that's how I got to where I am. And then in 2013, I formed a group called In the Field on Facebook, which I wanted to bring together people that were out there that were hunting it like I am, with cameras and telescopes and trying to pick up visual evidence of this phenomena. And so I began to find people on the internet that were trustworthy, that I knew were out there and only driven to capture these anomalous images for their own curiosity. And as time went on, I came across 1,000 hoaxers that were setting up CGI videos and making a ton of money from this stuff. And the old hoaxers like Billy Meyer, the farmer from Switzerland back in the 70s, he fooled a ton of people. And in the beginning, he fooled me. He had me fooled in the early years. And then I really began to once I gained more knowledge about digital imaging and photography, I began to look closer at his visual evidence and began to see that, there's people out there trying to make money, they're trying to get web clicks, so that's what brought me to where I am now.
Yeah. So you started out being a photographer, correct? Before you got really into the UFOs?
Yes, in my high school here in Massachusetts, we had an amazing photography class, which in my high school, we had our own dark room, all the developing with the chemicals, the old traditional way of photography. And so I went through 4 years of that training in high school. And once leaving high school and moving on to, digital cameras, computers, pixels, all that type of stuff. So,
Yeah. So how long have you been photographing UFOs now?
so in the early years, my interest kind of moved around a bit. So I had like a deep interest in the beginning, trying to capture um, spiritual things, trying to capture ghosts if possible. Excuse me. And so I began to try to do that. And then, I thought, well, I mean, there's visual evidence out there of these anomalous things in the sky, so I'll try to capture this as well. And as time went on, um, I captured things that later on down the road, I would go back and I would debunk them myself and figure out what they were. Oh, that was a balloon in the distance, or that was an insect flying by and leaving a trail, or, just all of the possibilities of mundane images. And so early, probably, I'd say, I wouldn't say I captured anything anomalous until probably the late 90s is when I started to pick up some things. And then once I moved to using infrared cameras, then I really started to pick up some weird stuff. And I've captured some things with still imagery as well. So I've been doing it for a few years now, doing the actual images.
But you did a lot of research before you got heavy into the UFO part, right?
Yeah, I spent a lot of years going deep into it, all the old stories and looking at the old evidence. And, I think that if you're going to get involved in this field, that you really have to do your homework with the history of the subject.
Yeah.
Just just as if you were interested in, World War II, you're going to go back and you're going to do your research and look at, everything about it. And I think it's important. There's a lot of people in the field today that have just come into the field and they don't really know the history of it. So
Yeah.
they'll make statements like, for instance, some recent cases that happened with the U.S. government, people, claiming that it's somebody else's technology. When if you know the history of ufology, you know that these things have been being seen for literally hundreds of years. And
Yeah.
there's records all down through the literature that shows that, but they're not familiar with the history. So,
So you were very skeptical in the beginning.
I wouldn't say as skeptical as I am now, because like I said, there were some really great hoaxers out there that fooled a lot of people. Billy Meyer being an example, the farmer from Switzerland. So his photos became so famous that one of them was used hanging behind uh, Mulder's desk on the X Files, and it's a famous poster that says, "I want to believe."
Yeah.
And so, his photos became huge. In fact, to this day, they're still selling calendars and shirts with it on it. And, you know,
Yeah,
most people know that he was building models and hoaxing things. So,
yeah. Now, you yourself never claimed to be abducted by aliens, right? You've never said that.
so I never have said that um, in the way that you said it. And I can't really be sure if something happened to me, but this is covered in the documentary that's on YouTube as well, where when I was 3 or 4 years old, I had disappeared from our family home. My father was a police officer. Um, and so, another long story short, um, I was found a couple miles away coming out of a pasture of cows and telling my parents and the neighbors that I was talking to the horses. So the strangest parts about this story is that my mother wrote about it in her diary. She talked to me about it multiple times as I was growing up. I never had memories of it. It happened a second time, and both times the house was deadbolted from the inside. And when they got up and I was gone, the deadbolt was still locked. So they could never figure out how I got out of the house, especially being 3 or 4 years old. I couldn't even reach the lock. So, I began to remember this stuff when I began to do research. So these stories of my past never really stuck out that much. They weren't that important. But when I began to do the research and think about those stories, I thought, maybe there's a possibility. Is this the reason why I'm so, you know, obsessed with the subject? I mean,
Yeah,
I don't know.
yeah. Now, did I think I read somewhere that your brother had seen the UFOs or encountered some experience? Is that correct?
This is also in the documentary where my brother kept having uh, two dreams that he would have multiple times, which caused him to have, a lot of nightmares. Well, they were nightmares, but for him to, be afraid of the dark and all the things like that. So one dream was he kept seeing a giant praying mantis, the insect, looking in the window. And then the second dream was he would wake up, he would float down the stairs, he would come around the corner, and in his words, he would see me in a chair hooked up to machinery, and around me were men with big heads. And those were his words. And to this day, I can say that to him and remind him about that dream, and he remembers it very clearly.
Yeah,
So, I mean, is it connected? I guess you could, say circumstantially, but that's really all you can say. It's
yeah,
I have no idea if it means anything.
yeah. So I imagine you've talked to a lot of people who claim to have been abducted by people from outer space.
Um, I I've done a lot of research into the abduction aspect, but I have not talked to a lot of people that have claimed that. So for me, it's kind of, I feel that yes, there's a possible basis in truth for these abductions. My problem with it is there's not a lot of evidence. There's nothing really solid. There's been certain little cases here and there where there's been some strange, you know, smaller types of evidence found. Um, but when someone comes to me, which they'll say I'm an experiencer, aliens have been coming to get me for years. I always encourage people that if this is happening to you and you're claiming it's happening, get yourself a motion sensor camera. They're cheap. You can get them real cheap. Hook it up in your bedroom and just let it run. And I encourage them every time. And so far, I've not seen a single piece of footage showing that. Now, there's been some that claim when these so-called aliens come that the camera goes dead or it malfunctions and it doesn't work. It's possible, but I mean, with the hundreds, thousands of people that claim to be abducted, there's got to be a way to catch that on camera somehow, some way, you know? That's how I feel about it.
Yeah. Now, you're an artist also, correct? Do you paint anything that's related to UFOs or?
Yes, well, I used to in the past when I first got into it. You can see this painting right here above my shoulder.
Mhm.
I painted that year. That was about 95. Um, and I would do, pen drawings and, uh, every so often I'll do a doodle, but I mean, I don't do it too much anymore. Um,
Yeah,
and I've done some for a few websites. I've done some illustration work for them.
yeah. And you know that there's a lot of fake sightings and so-called abductions that a lot of people make those claims, but just have no evidence, right? No proof of it.
Right. So, I mean, there's like, there's a I used to put out a list every year of websites that were known hoaxers or they were feeding the public misinformation. And I would make these lists and they went around the web. And I stopped doing it because there has now become so many of these web pages that I can't make a list anymore. It's impossible.
Yeah,
We would discover new ones every year. So some of these guys would get so good that they would put up videos on YouTube, and within a year they were making 500 grand.
really.
Yes, just from these fake videos.
Yeah,
And there's certain uh news organizations that are on the web that will take those fake links and spread them everywhere. And, so that guy gets money every time his video gets clicked.
yeah,
He gets a ton of money. And right now, there's not a lot of them doing it. It's somewhat died down with the fakers, but they're still out there.
yeah,
There's people still doing it, so you have to be vigilant. You got to be really careful,
yeah.
you know, so.
I think I seen on an interview that you did where somebody did a Photoshop picture once that was so good you thought it was real and you spread it around for a while till you caught on. Is that right? Did I get that right?
No, what happened was this is actually talked about, and the photo is printed in Diana Pasulka's book, American Cosmic. So, what happened was it was a website that was challenging people in the public to create a photo that could fool anyone. And so I decided to use Billy Meyer's technique, but I used it in a smaller version. So I built like a 6-inch UFO. I glued a bunch of parts together, spray painted it silver, um, and then I hung it from a fishing line out in my backyard and I photographed it. And then with the computer, I took out the fishing line and erased it. This photo, they loved it. They were like, oh my God, this is incredible. They pasted it on their webpage and I forgot all about it. And then must have been a year or two later, I happened to come across this website and there was my photo. And next to it was a story about a boy who was delivering newspapers. He saw it, took out his camera and took a picture of it. So I said,
Yeah,
oh my God. So at that moment, I promised myself that I would never do that again, that
yeah,
I would never create, because once you know how they fake it, you can fake it as well.
yeah.
And once you can figure out how everybody else has done it, there's ways to do it. So I would never do that again.
Yeah.
It's just something that now it's turned up on hundreds of websites. I found a bunch of apps that you can download for UFOs where they've used it for the icon for the app. The photos gone all over the world.
Yeah.
So I will never do that again.
So what about Area 51, Scott? We've all heard about that for decades. What's going on out there?
I wish I knew. um, it's interesting because, you know, really until the whole thing blew up in the 90s, nobody even really believed that there was a base out there. It was kind of like a legend, and people never really spoke about it, little bits and pieces of information. And then, boom, the public found out there's this massive base out there. Um, I think that if we have recovered any kind of crashed, machine or object, it's probably out there
Yeah.
because it's the best place to keep it. I mean, you want to keep it as far from the public as possible.
Right.
That's probably it. Um, but whatever they're doing out there, I think there's a saying where it says the technology that they have out there now, we won't see for another 30 years, because they kind of keep it for themselves and they do things with it. So
Yeah.
it's a mysterious place. It's definitely interesting though.
Yeah. Do you think the United States government or any government has actual proof there's been people or other beings from other planets came here?
Um, there are definitely people in possession of material that they can't explain where it came from. And um, there's a scientist that I'm a friend with. I'm friends with on Twitter. I've spoken to him a few times. They built a machine to analyze material down to the subatomic level, which they've never been able to do that before. And so they can put any material into this machine and this will analyze it down to that level. And they can look at it and see and trace its whereabouts. So if it was made here, in a certain, constructed way, then they can trace it. Um, there's a book coming out soon from Dr. Jacques Vallée, who's a huge idol of mine. He's probably the grandfather of ufology, one of the best scientists, actual scientists to ever enter the field. He's been doing a lot of work with so-called recovered material. Now, this is not to say that they have a whole recovered UFO. I can't say that, but I can say that they do have scraps of material that they found. They don't know where it came from. So I think he's releasing a new book. I think it's coming out within the next couple months. I think it's coming out only on Kindle first, but I think it's called The Best Kept Secret. It's his newest book, and if anyone is interested in the field, go and buy all of his books. And he's one of the most grounded people in the field, one of the best viewpoints. And this book, this new one that he's going to be coming out with, there's sections of it, I believe, that are going to go into what they're doing right now with this recovered material.
Yeah.
So
What was
it's
his name again?
Dr. Jacques Vallée.
Okay.
And he was, if you remember the movie Close Encounters of the Third
Oh,
Kind.
yes, I loved it.
So the French scientist is based on Dr. Jacques Vallée. That scientist Jacques Vallée consulted with Steven Spielberg, but an actor played him in the movie and he had a different name in the movie, but
Okay,
it was based on him.
yeah. That was a very good movie. That was back in the seventies, I guess, or eighties. I
Yeah,
don't
I think
remember.
75 or
75.
77 maybe.
Okay, yeah.
Yep.
So would you encourage people to keep an open mind?
I definitely would. I mean, like I said, you've got to be careful that you're not swayed into one area or another, because there's a
Yeah,
lot of people out there really trying to you know um there's one famous researcher, you probably heard of him, Dr. Stephen Greer, who's made some documentaries, and he's done some great work with they've gone out and they've captured some incredible footage, but within this realm he has built this storyline around this phenomena, giving it names and its beliefs, and building this mythology around it, which is, you just can't do that. If anybody comes to you in this field and they tell you, I've got all the answers, I'll fill you in, you probably should turn and walk away
yeah,
because they don't have the answers.
yeah. Have you written any books about UFOs, or are you planning to?
I have not. I have been slowly piecing together a book which has probably been working on it for 3 years.
Okay,
So it's coming together. I'm not sure when I'll get it done, but
yeah.
I would like to get it out there and publish it.
Well, as an author myself, I understand that process. You start something, but you don't know if or when it's ever actually going to get finished. So I do understand that.
Yeah,
Now,
absolutely.
tell us more about this web group you said called In the Field. You said that was on Facebook?
Right. So like I said, I wanted to form it to bring these people together that were trying to go out there and hunt this phenomena. So this handful of people that I met in the beginning included a man named Charles Lamoureux, who's uh, from Vancouver, Canada. He is in the medical field, and his interest exploded, years ago. And he took a bunch of money and built this unit that has multiple cameras on it, um, video screens so he can see what he's doing. I mean, just incredible equipment, the money that he spent to do this. And what inspired him was he lived in this high rise building in Vancouver. He spotted this object one night, and I believe on a different night, uh, one of these objects floated right into his apartment, and it was this blue small orb, and it stunned him. It shocked him so much. So he went out, he began to do research, he began to buy equipment. Pretty soon, he began to pick this stuff up. And he's filmed some incredible things. There's one where it's about the size of a basketball. He's filming the skyscraper that's across from him, and the orb comes in and hovers right at the balcony of somebody's apartment. Then it slowly drops to the next balcony and it hovers.
Wow.
And he's also um, very, very deeply into drones. He flies them, he
Okay.
knows how they work. So he knows how to identify them on video.
Yeah.
And the footage that he's caught is just not even close to a drone. It's just
Yeah.
not. Um, so back to the beginning. So this small core group of people. So Charles was one of them. There was another woman from Pennsylvania. Her name is Allison Cruz. She's caught some incredible stuff over uh, a mountainous area of Pennsylvania that is littered with old abandoned mines. And these objects were going down in there into these trees, and she began to film this stuff with infrared cameras. So I brought this group together, and then we began to gather people. And so, uh, you know, we'd go out and we'd hunt with video cameras, with telescopes, with cameras hooked up, with FLIR cameras, with just anything anybody was using, and then post the footage in the group. And then we talk about it and pick out different aspects of it and its behavior, and have those discussions about it. That's how it all really began.
Okay. So do you think there's a connection between the paranormal and UFOs?
I do. I think that a lot of it is somehow tightly wound with each other. And I only say this because a lot of times with researchers in this field, they'll say that once you become aware of the phenomena, it becomes aware of you. And so a lot of us will say we have high strangeness in our life, which I've had a bunch of events happen around me that don't really have anything to do with UFOs, but I believe it's kind of connected somehow.
Yeah.
Um, I've had things move and sounds and, just a lot of different things. I had an event happen in my bedroom about a year and a half, 2 years ago, where something startled me awake. I sat up in the bed and I stood up and I began to automatically walk towards the hallway for some reason. Something startled me. I just came right up, stood up, and as I was walking, there was this dark, large shadow moving in front of me. And so when I got to the hallway, there was the shape of the window on the wall from the moonlight coming through. And this shape blocked that out just for a second as it passed. And I thought for a moment that one of my children was out of bed. And then I thought, well, maybe the moon is being blocked by branches outside. Maybe that's what blocked out the shape of the light on the wall. And I looked out the window and there was a full moon. There was no branches near it at all. Then I thought, well, maybe my stepson was out of bed. He had to go to the bathroom. I opened the door. He was sound asleep. So there's been a bunch of stuff like that. So I think that it's somehow attached to it. I'm not sure how,
Yeah.
if there's like things that we can't really see, that are not, uh, our vision isn't built to see this stuff. Maybe it's around us all the time and we don't see it.
Yeah.
Your guess is as good as mine.
Yeah. So what country has seen the most UFO sightings allegedly?
I'm not really sure. I've never really kept up with the numbers. There are countries where it's very high. Places like Mexico. Um, the U.S. we've got a pretty good size number. The United Kingdom, they're pretty high. Um, and then there's others that are very low, which could be tied to their culture, that maybe it's just not something that they come forward with, or they look at it as a religious type of symbol, or different things like that. But
Yeah.
I'm not really sure who has the highest. But
Is there one particular state in the United States that has significantly more than any other?
um there's a handful that usually, see, it's really hard to tell because certain years a certain area will have what they used to call a flap. And a flap would be where a bunch of UFOs are being seen over a significant period of time.
Yeah.
So these flaps are kind of died off now. Like they don't really happen like they used to. Um, but occasionally they still do happen. So, you know, it depends on the state. I mean, there's areas, hot spots where, like I said, like Allison in Pennsylvania, her hotspot went on for, I think, a period of 4 years. And
Really?
she kept filming this stuff, and people thought she was crazy. People said it was planes. And when you watch her actual videos and you study them very closely, you can tell that it's not aircraft, it's
Yeah.
something else. So I would say, that there's definite hot spots, like, for instance, the Skinwalker Ranch out in Utah, which is a big hot spot. You know, uh, there's a place called, um, the Marley Woods, which I think is in Missouri. I'm not positive. Another place that's a hot spot. People see stuff there all the time. Um, you know, Hessdalen in 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 um, in Norway. Uh, you know, got a good friend out there, that's a scientist. He's got, they actually have, um, booths out there that are built to capture this stuff, and the, they're hooked up to actual live webcams. You can go on and you can watch them online, but um, they've had teams out there for a while. He's been doing it for decades now,
Yeah.
and they've captured a bunch of really strange stuff. So there's definitely hot spots.
Yeah. Well, it certainly is interesting. Now, are the cattle mutilations we hear about every now and then, is that supposedly connected to UFOs or the paranormal?
You know, it's
Huh?
funny. It's funny you ask that, because I actually run another group that just surrounds that aspect
Oh,
of the UFO.
really? Okay.
Yes, so I've been doing that for years too, but I don't talk about it as much because it's something that I think that whole aspect of the, if you want to say it's an aspect of the UFO phenomena, it scares people. And, for good reason. I mean, there's some weird stuff going on out there. So, can I say that it's directly linked to UFOs? I can't say that. What I can say is it's still going on to this day. It's been going on for a very, very long time. We just
Yeah.
had, uh, a woman just posted in the group just not even a couple weeks ago. It just happened, out in the Midwest. So it's still continuing to happen. And there are UFOs seen in the vicinity of these mutilations.
Yeah.
And so I guess you could say, again, circumstantially, it's connected.
Yeah.
Can we say that that's what it is? We can't really do that.
Yeah.
But it is one of the most bizarre aspects of the whole phenomena.
Yeah. It is.
And the scariest part is that there's actually been a few human mutilations.
Oh,
And
really?
yes, and one of them, um, the photos of this man's body were leaked online. It was from Brazil. I'm pretty sure it's either Brazil or I think it's Brazil. Um, and the missing body parts are identical to the cattle. They're identical.
Wow.
Um, and I won't go into it, but, the sex organs are missing. Um, the anus area is completely cored out, just like the cattle.
Oh,
Um, the entire, mouth area is gone, lips and all, one ear. Um, there is two small holes. One is in the chest, and it's approximately about a half inch, perfect blackened hole. But through that hole was taking all the internal organs. It was completely gone on the inside. And
Yeah.
the whole autopsy report was released online. And there was a second case that resembled it exactly. So whatever it is very elusive. People have tried to catch it on video. Police have tried to catch it. There's been cases where they have set up at a farm all night in the dark, in silence, and stayed up all night long. Not a sound. Not a sound. When the sun came up, the cattle was mutilated.
Really?
Didn't make a sound. With, a 2,500 pound animal, taking it down, taking its body parts in the dark, and not a sound is heard. And
That
these
is
guys
weird.
are, yes, it's very bizarre. And I think that it's not looked into so much. The constant excuse for it is predators. But you can go and look at pictures of animals that have been attacked by predators, and you can see the difference.
Yeah.
They're torn, and it's random ripping and tearing, whereas a classic mutilation has everything removed in a precise way. Everything is cut perfectly. They've actually had one where the eye was removed, but around the eye, the hair was removed down to the skin in a perfect circle, cut right around the eye. And it's just bizarre.
Yeah.
So like you asked me, can I say it's connected? I can't really. I mean, we can make a connection because we saw some anomalous light
Yeah.
on the same date as this body turns up, but you know, again, your guess is as good as mine.
Yeah. So how about the crop circles? Are they related to UFOs?
um, I think there's a core group of these that have some strange anomalous activity around them. But I also believe that it has become an art form for people. And I think there's a lot of people out there doing it now.
Yeah.
And it's kind of muddied the waters in that area because now people can't tell the difference between the authentic and you know and the funny thing is that in the early days um they were called crop nests, and they were just depressions in the grass of something sitting there. And you can go online and you can find photographs. I believe there's a famous case from Australia where they show some of these crop nests. People saw these objects come down in this field. They went there later on. There was depressions in the grass. And so there's a possibility that, maybe the people who like to fake those got inspired by that. I mean, but there has been some research done to where they've gone into some of the circles and they've had a very high magnetic field, and it jumps off the meter. They can't explain it. Um, there's been some biological changes picked up in the uh, plant life that's within the circle, like the wheat or the barley, and they've looked at those and saw, you know, biological changes in those in the lab. Um, but again, the evidence for that is kind of, I'm kind of on the fence. But here's uh, a lot of people don't know this is that I used to be a MUFON investigator, and you've heard of MUFON, right?
MUFON?
Yeah, MUFON. So MUFON is the biggest, It's called the Mutual UFO Network. And it is the biggest civilian network that's been around since the 1960s. So you can join this group, train to be an investigator. You order their manual, you study it, you become an investigator, and you join the chapter that's in your area. So back in the 90s, I decided to join MUFON because I didn't have an idea to start my own thing. I just saw these guys and I went, oh, this is fantastic. I'm going to get involved. So I joined. I think it was maybe close to 8, 9 months later, I get an email pops up one day and it says, listen, there's a crop circle in your area. We need you to go there and look at it. So automatically in my brain, I thought it's a bunch of kids, they're fooling around. And I really thought this because it was in corn. And crop circles have appeared in corn around the world, but it's much more rare than when they turn up in like, wheat or barley or rye. So corn is very, there's very few cases like that. So I jump in the car. This circle happens to be less than a mile from my home. So I'm thinking in my head when I'm driving to these people's house, this is going to be over and done with in no time. I'm going to go in there and I'm going to find evidence that a bunch of kids did this. I drive up to the house, a very well-known older couple that runs a farm stand. They grow flowers and vegetables. Very, very nice people. Some of the best people in the whole town. So they invite me in and, they offer me something to drink and everything. So we head out to the back and he says, you have to walk through this short flower bed to get to the circle. And there's the corn back behind the flower bed. So I walk through the flower bed and I get up to the circle and there it is, this perfect circle about 30 feet around. So I said, well, has anybody gone into the circle since you found it? And he said, no one's been in here at all. He said, even my wife wouldn't even come down here and cut her flowers because it was kind of scaring her. So I got down on my hands and knees and I crawled around the entire perimeter of that circle to see if I could find one footprint in that dirt, in that soft dirt, which would have left impressions from some kid's sneaker, some guy's boot. There was nothing. There was not a single footprint in that circle. That was the first weird part. The second weird part was I get down on the ground and look at the stalks that are on the outer edges of this circle. And it looked as if I took a ballpoint pen and I heated it with a lighter and then bent it. So the stalk was coming up out of the ground and then curved out and away from the circle. Like it had grown that way, like around something. It was absolutely bizarre. But you can see pictures of it on my old website. I took pictures of the circle and everything that happened. So anyways, long story short, I interviewed all the neighbors. The woman who lived in the house, she woke up in the middle of the night, saw a bright light out the window, automatically in her mind thought the sheriffs were looking for an escaped prisoner with a helicopter. She just had this thought in her head. Doesn't really know why. Went back to bed. In the next house over lives their daughter. Their daughter woke up, saw the light, thought her father was out there with the flashlight, went back to bed. The house on the other side of them, that neighbor woke up, saw it, didn't really think anything. He went back to bed. He saw this bright light in the sky. One of the most important witnesses, the fourth house, was a Palmer police officer. And he happened to step outside on his deck, saw this bright light through the trees and he thought it was the moon. But then his girlfriend, who was with him, pointed back behind them and said, "No, the moon's over there." And so they stood and they watched it for a short period of time, never spoke about it again, walked into the house, got in bed, and went to sleep. So we had the 4 witnesses, and you know, well, long story short, so I was only an investigator trainee, so I had to call in the guy who was above me. So he didn't show up until a week later, and by that time, the circle had been reined in. The corn around it had, for some weird reason, fell down. All of it had fallen down flat. There was people coming from all over town to look at it because so many people had heard about it. So there was farmers coming from other farms. So all the information was sent to MUFON. And months later, we sent dirt samples, plant samples, photos, interviews, everything, the whole entire investigation. Months later, I tried to get feedback from them. And unfortunately, I couldn't get it. They wouldn't give me the feedback. I was trying to get like simple answers like, did you test the soil? Did something come up, like maybe a magnetic anomaly or something? And they just kept giving me the runaround.
Yeah.
So that's when I decided to leave MUFON. And then a few years later, created my own thing because, a lot of people have had problems with MUFON in the past.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like they like to hoard information, and I believe that, if they're collecting this data, it needs to be available to the public, to everybody in the public, so.
That certainly is interesting. And you've definitely shared a lot of important and exciting information. And I do thank you for being willing to do that.
Well, thank you for having me.
Maybe we can do it again sometime if you're interested. You can tell us
I'm
more exciting stories.
absolutely interested. I would love to do it again.
Okay. Well, Scott, I will let you go. And thanks again. And you have a wonderful evening.
You too. Thanks.
Okay.